Even though the new Sony XB43 has some really meaningful upgrades to it, like an all-new speaker setup, which genuinely does sound better, and it now has USB-C charging, which does make life a little easier, I can't help but feel that performance-wise, the XB43 does leave you wanting more, and it's not that big of an upgrade when compared to the XB41. Now, price-wise, the XB43 retails for $250, just like how the XB41 used to retail for when it first came out. Now, for those wondering, no, there is no XB42. For some reason, the XB42 just never came out. But regardless, if you want to pick either of these speakers up, there will be a link down below. So, design-wise, the XB43 is very different from the XB41. First off, I want to point out that the XB43 is very dense and is much heavier than the XB41. The XB43 weighs in at 6.5 pounds, whereas the XB41 weighs in at 3.3 pounds. And you'll also notice that the XB43 is noticeably larger than the XB41. Now, just like the XB41, the XB43 has a mostly fabric-covered body, which can take a beating if you decide to take the speaker on the go with you. And the XB43 is still IP67 rated, meaning that if the speaker gets wet, it's gonna be perfectly fine. But keep in mind, the XB43 now has these exposed passive radiators on either side, so you want to be mindful about not pushing them in. But personally, I do prefer the XB41's smaller and lighter design because it just makes it way easier to take on the go with you. Now, one of the standout features of the XB43 is its light feature, and it's not all that different from the light feature found on the XB41. You've got these light strips on either side that flash in different colors, and the woofers and tweeters on the speaker each flash independently from one another. And from Sony's app, you've got a few different lighting modes to choose from, but the main ones here are Rave, Chill, and Strobe. Now, the lighting feature on the XB43 isn't amazing, and it certainly isn't the best one out there, but it does get the job done. Now, I do want to quickly also point out Sony's second app for this speaker called Fiestable. You can go in and specifically select what color you want your speaker to flash, but this app is so clunky, I just never use it. But now let's talk about tech specs. First off, the XB43 now strictly charges via a USB-C port, unlike the XB41, which used to charge via a micro USB port or through an AC port. Now, personally, I really like that the XB43 now charges via a USB-C port because if you're an Android user, you can charge your phone and speaker with the same cable. But just keep in mind, this USB-C port is strictly used for charging. You can't use this USB-C port as a wired connection, and you also can't use this USB-C port to charge any other devices. But the XB43 does come included with its own USB-C charging cable. Now, when it comes to battery life, the XB43 has an advertised battery life of 24 hours when set in stamina mode, and 14 hours when set in extra bass mode. Now, just to be blunt, the speaker is really only worth using while it's set in extra bass mode, because when the speaker is set into stamina mode, the speaker sounds very flat. Now, real-world use with the speaker set in extra bass mode and with the volume set at 100%, this speaker is really only good for around 2 hours of playback time. And if you have this speaker set at 80% volume, the speaker is only good for around 5 hours of playback time. So overall, I'm not all that impressed by the battery life performance on this speaker. Now, when it comes to Bluetooth connectivity, this speaker has been upgraded to Bluetooth 5.0. But more importantly, the speaker performs very similarly to the XB41 in the way that the speaker can still be connected to two devices at the same time. So you and a friend can both be DJ, and the speaker also has zero latency across the board whenever you're watching movies or videos on your phone, whether you're using an iPhone or an Android device. And when it comes to audio codecs, both the XB43 and XB41 have support for SBC, AAC, and LDAC. But if you want, you can always just use a wired connection with the XB43 because the XB43 still has an audio jack. Now, I do think it's very important to point out that the XB43 still has an audio jack because the new XB33 and XB43 don't. And also, the XB43 also has a USB-A out port so that you can charge your own devices. But personally, I would have really liked if the speaker also had a USB-C out port because a lot of phones are starting to come with USB-C to USB-C charging cables. Even the new iPhone 12 comes in, is it iPhone 12? No, we're at iPhone 11, I'm already in the future. Even the new iPhone 11 and presumably the iPhone 12 is going to come included with a USB-C to Lightning cable. So I do think that it's time that speakers start to integrate a USB-A out port because USB-C cables are starting to become more and more popular. But now let's talk about listening to music with this speaker because this is where things get very interesting. First off, the XB43 has an all-new speaker setup which I both like and don't like. The part that I do like is that the XB43 now has dual woofers and dual tweeters, which is great because the highs and vocals are much cleaner and much better defined on the speaker. But what I don't like is that this speaker now has dual passive radiators shooting out the sides. So now you can't easily amplify the bass as much on this speaker by simply placing it up against a wall, like you can with the XB41 because its passive radiators shoot out the front and back. But keep in mind, the XB41 only has dual woofers, unlike the XB43, which also have tweeters. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the speaker is really only worth using when in extra bass mode, because when it's set to stamina mode, the speaker severely reduces its bass, which just makes it sound very flat. But also keep in mind, even though the XB43 now has this new stamina mode, it's nothing new, it's just the standard mode found on the XB41. But obviously just rebranded to make it look like the XB43 got a new feature over the XB41. But with all that being said, we're going to jump into a sound test. And the sound test has both of these speakers playing at max volume, so that you can hear their performance difference.
All alive. The devil's in the detail, lingered inside. Oh, a holy crime. But how can I hide you without an alibi? It's a endless fight without an alibi. To my innocence, I can't wait no longer. I'm playing with the monsters, everything that brought me alive. Oh, we're all like monsters, playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a endless fight without an alibi. To my innocence without an alibi. Smoking gun, you got me on the run. We know that will come. We're all up to dawn, but how can I hide you without an alibi? It's a endless fight without an alibi. To my innocence, I can't wait no longer. I'm playing with the monsters, everything that brought me alive. Oh, we're all like monsters, playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a endless fight without an alibi. To
first off, I gotta point out that yes, the smaller XB41 not only gets noticeably louder than the XB43, but its bass also packs a much deeper punch than the bass on the XB43. Having the XB43 set at max volume is like having the XB41 at like 90% volume. So yes, when it comes to loudness and bass, the XB43 does leave you wanting more. But something that I will not deny is that the vocals and highs do sound much cleaner on the XB43s than on the XB41s because of those new tweeters. One of the biggest problems with the XB41 is that it sounds a little muffled because those highs are struggling to be heard and everything just sounds very close together. Whereas with the XB43, it does sound noticeably more open. So from a sound quality standpoint, yes, the XB43 does sound better than the XB41. But I think that your average user is going to be more concerned about maximum volume and how much bass these speakers have. And unfortunately, what you get with the XB43 is what you get because even if you use the speaker while it's plugged in, you're not going to get any type of performance bump like you might with some other speakers in this price segment or size range. But something this speaker does have going for it is that it has an adjustable EQ, so you can play around with the bass, mids, and treble. But personally, I just like to use this speaker in extra bass mode when I'm gonna listen to music, and I switch it over to stamina mode, and I know you can't see me, but I'm actually doing air quotes when I say stamina mode. But like I was saying, I like to use this speaker when in stamina mode when I'm going to listen to a podcast because the extra bass on this speaker can get overpowering when people are talking. But overall, even though the XB43 does sound better, I think a lot of people are still going to look at this speaker as a downgrade from the XB41 because it doesn't get as loud or pack as much of a punch in its bass. But finally, let's talk about speaker pairing protocols because Sony's newer speakers are now using Party Connect, whereas Sony's older speakers are using wireless party chain. So what this means is that the XB43 can only be connected to newer Sony speakers using Party Connect, like another XB43, an XB33, or an XB23. And this also means that you can't hook up an XB43 to any of Sony's older speakers using wireless party chain, like an XB41, XB32, XB22, XB31, XB21, and the list just goes on. So overall, even though the XB43 has some really good things for it and it's a fine speaker, I don't think this speaker is worth the upgrade and Sony could have done so much more. I really like that the XB43 now has dual tweeters because it really does help the highs sound much cleaner. But ironically, now this speaker has less bass than its predecessor because its new passive radiators shoot out the sides. And also, this speaker is noticeably quieter than its predecessor as well. I really like that the XB43 now has a USB-C port for charging, but the real-world battery life on this speaker is really lacking. At max volume, this speaker is only going to last you around 2 hours when set in extra bass mode. So there's really no need to upgrade here, and if you're looking for a deal, I say pick up the XB41 while you can. I think you can find them on sale for like $150 right now. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. If you want to pick any of the products up mentioned in this video, those will be linked in the description down below, and you can also support the channel by checking out the merch store. But other than that, I'll catch you next time.